The truth about the Palme murder. This is, in my opinion, what happened to Olof Palme on the 28th of February, 1986. The White House ordered the assassination via Vice President George H.W. Bush. Bush, the former CIA director, was a lifelong friend of Peter Wallenberg, Europe's most powerful businessman. Peter's father and George father had worked together. The Brown brothers' Harriman, where George Father Prescott Bush was a partner, had a long collaboration with the Wallenberg family's bank Stockholm's and Skilda Bank. During the 1980s, Peter Wallenberg was a liaison between the Swedish Supreme Commander Lennart Ljung and NATO, a post he took over from his father, Marcus Wallenberg. Marcus Wallenberg was Sweden's business contact with the United States during the Second World War. After the war, Marcus continued as a secret liaison between the United States and Sweden. He arranged meetings at the Wallenbergs' representative place Tacka Udden, where the king, the Swedish Supreme Commander, and Henry Kissinger participated. The Swedish Supreme Commander Stig Synnergren was so close to Marcus in the 70s that he was named chairman of the board in the Wallenberg Company Stora after his retirement as commander. Commander Lennart Ljung was appointed head of the king's staff after the murder of Olof Palme and awarded the king's finest medal. Peter Wallenberg, who was a very good friend of the king, continued to arrange the meetings at Tacka Udden after his father's death in 1982. Sweden now had a dual state. The official democratic one, with Olof Palme in the lead, that was in favor of nuclear disarmament, and the secret one, which consisted of the elite in the business and military world. The secret state worked actively against Olof Palme together with the Swedish Security Service and the likes of Bertil Wedin, a Swedish intelligence agent. Palme made it clear as early as 1982 that he would introduce a nuclear-free zone in the Nordic region. The zone would have weakened NATO's northern flank and destroyed the MAD doctrine. MAD stands for Mutual Assured Destruction. It is a doctrine that was fully declared in the early 1960s by United States Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The doctrine maintained peace in the world since it made the superpowers deter each other from attacking by arming themselves with nuclear weapons. The Reagan administration in particular believed in rearmament and the MAD doctrine. The plan to murder Palme resulted in the SOPS documents, detailing how NATO planned the assassination. SOPS, Special Operations Planning Staff Committee, was a committee that controlled the secret stay behind armies in 16 Western European countries, a movement that had been formed during the Cold War to prevent a Soviet attack. NATO decided that the assassination should be carried out by the arms manufacturer Bofors, owned by Peter Wallenberg and Erich Penser, also a private friend of the king, who according to the documents hosted the meetings in Wiltshire where the murder was planned, and stay behind with the commander-in-chief Lennart Ljung in the lead. Bofors smuggled weapons to Iran, just like the Reagan administration. The entire investigation after the murder was a cover-up with Hans Holmer, the first leader of the investigation, in the lead. He became involved through a man named Gösta Engman. Gösta Engman was since 1975 a director at Peter Wallenberg's company Electrolux and a member of the secret NATO army Stay Behind. He was also a relative to Holmer. Their wives were cousins, and they were good friends from the age of 18. Engman's son Michael McLean has told all about this on a YouTube channel and identified his father as the man Holmer picked up on the night of the murder when he was driven around in Stockholm. Holmer's driver, a former military called Rolf Dahlgren, told the press that he drove Holmer around in Stockholm on the night of the murder. First, he picked up a man in the afternoon, identified as Engman, at the central station, and dropped him off at an art gallery just opposite to Palme's home. Then, Dahlgren drove the man to the police headquarters. Later in the evening, when Hans Holmer was in the car, they picked up the same man at the Opera House and drove him to Odenplan, just a few blocks from the murder site. Holmer and his driver was then at the scene of the murder when the murder occurred. Holmer's driver told all about this in the 90s on Swedish television. He was later found dead in his bathtub. Holmer lied after the murder and said that he was in Borlänge to ski Vasaloppet at the time of the murder, which is not true. Far-right police officers were involved in the murder and were around the murder scene. Many of them are still alive. A far-right military officer, close friend to Holmer and one of the cops involved, was appointed at the telecommunications company at the time of the murder to tap Palme's phone. He and his police friend got to sell weapons for millions of Swedish crowns to Holmer and the Palme Group after the murder. A military officer came to visit one of the key witnesses after the murder, telling her to keep quiet. Holmer said after the murder that Sweden will shake in its foundations when the truth comes out. And with what we know from the NATO documents, that applies not only to Sweden, but the entire Western world. Licio Gelli, member of the Masonic Lodge Propaganda Do in Rome, sent a telegram 72 hours before the murder to a United States Republican Party member, also part of the lodge and founder of the Knights Templar, Philip Guarino, and said that the Swedish tree will soon fall and that he should tell their good friend Bush. Guarino worked for Bush on his campaign and was a good friend of him. Olof Palme was called the tree in the United States because of his name. On the 14th of July, 1997, the defected CIA agent Chip Tatum said in a radio interview in Los Angeles that a special operations group created by George Bush lies behind the murder of Olof Palme. Palme had hindered the weapons cartels in their smuggling of weapons to Iran. Tatum said that Bush hired South African agents to commit the murder. Even the famous author of the Millennium books, Stieg Larsson, wrote about this. He found out that Bertil Wedin was used as a middleman. A man called Leif, until now unknown to the general public, came home the day after the murder and said to his wife that he knew who murdered Olof Palme. Then he went up to the attic and hid a weapon. I am currently doing videos about this man. Leif was paid a visit by a military man before the murder, who talked to him about Palme's nuclear-free zone. And that is the motive of NATO and the United States. Two of the policemen involved said in a police car on their way to the American embassy after the murder that they knew who the murderer was and that nobody would ever find out. The man driving the car, one of their colleagues, wrote this in a police report. But the investigators did nothing. One of the policemen arranged dinners before the murder, where the men called themselves the King's Boys. A man called Ivan von Birchon has said that George H.W. Bush ordered the murder, and that he was asked by William Colby at the Sheraton Hotel in Stockholm to kill Palme for money. The year after the murder, the new Prime Minister of Sweden, Ingvar Carlsson, was invited to the White House. To his surprise, Peter Wallenberg was there. Ingvar Carlsson said that he had no idea how Wallenberg came to be on the guest list. Wallenberg was not part of the Swedish delegation. George H.W. Bush was a CIA agent when John F. Kennedy was murdered, and vice president when Olof Palme was killed. Do you think that is a coincidence? The conclusion is that the United States ordered the murder. It was carried out by the NATO movement stay behind with the commander-in-chief in the lead, together with the Swedish Security Service and Swedish far-right policemen. The murderer was obviously a professional, perhaps someone from South Africa? And the murder weapon? Well, it probably lies in Leif's old house outside of Stockholm. He hid the weapon inside the wall of the attic. That is what his wife has said. She told the police about this in 2019, but they did nothing. Leif was also a close friend of a man who warned the police in the beginning of '86 that a conspiracy was about to murder Palme. There you have it, the murder of Olof Palme.